So let me just say a few words. First, we've got a few guests already, few members of the audience, and I want to welcome all of them to this panel on the job guarantee. David Merrill, the chair. We've got three speakers today, and I'll mention them in the order in which they're speaking. Patricia Pino, and then followed by Karen Van Sweden, and then Derk Ehnts. I was down as one of the speakers, but for health reasons, I could not do it. And Karen very kindly offered to fill in for me, for which I'm very grateful. The speakers will speak for about 20 minutes, and then that will be followed by 10 minutes question and answer. And so I just want to thank the Global Forum for hosting this very important session on the job guarantee. And especially I want to thank Samuel, who is our technical moderator. So, Patricia, do you want to start your presentation?
Sure. Just let me share my screen. If I can. Okay, so. Okay, I think that's fine.
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, so thank you for inviting me. My name is Patricia Pino, and I am co-host of the MMT podcast, and I am currently studying for a master's in economics at King's College London. I have also spent quite a lot of my life working as a chartered engineer, and so I have a bit of a mixture of backgrounds here. But what I want to do is, and what I focus mostly on the podcast with my colleague Christian Riley, is about teaching MMT for people who are not academics and in a way which is accessible and easy to understand. So I'm going to go into a bit of an overview of it. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but my colleagues will add more detail into the things that I am saying, but I just want to give you sort of an introduction to it. So what is MMT? Professor Bill Mitchell, who's one of the founding fathers of MMT, he often says that MMT is a lens, not a regime. And I think it's important that we establish that from the beginning. MMT is a description of how the monetary system works, and we have to apply our own moral value system to it before we can use it to make policy. Warren Mosler, who is another founding father of MMT, he also likes to highlight that one of MMT's main contributions to the study of economics is that of sequence. So what is the MMT sequence? I think it's best if we start reviewing how our current understanding of the money sequence is. So this is the mainstream or the neoliberal sequence and view of the relationship between government and the private sector. You have a government which first has to tax or borrow, and then it spends the revenues from the taxation and the borrowing. MMT effectively turns that on its head. So we say that the government first spends and then it taxes. So spending adds pounds to the economy, and taxation is a means of removing money from the economy. And I'm sorry, I'm using the word pounds a lot. I'm based in the UK, but bear with me for anybody who is from other countries. So how does MMT arrive at this order of events? And that's really understanding about the purpose of money itself. So in MMT, we start with a government that desires to provision itself with resources and labor. It doesn't matter at this point whether this government is democratic or authoritarian. It just needs to be an entity in a position of authority and a means to exercise that authority. The government uses this authority to impose tax liabilities, which are denominated in a token that it is allowed to create. In this case, that token is the pound for the UK case, so that the government starts taxing us in pounds and ensuring no one else can issue pounds except itself. And then it accepts only those pounds as a means of the payment of taxes. So once the tax is imposed, people need to earn those tokens, need to earn pounds in order to pay that tax. So the government's tax liabilities create people needing to do things to acquire these tokens. So in MMT, we say that taxes cause unemployment because people are now looking for ways to earn these tokens, whereas before they didn't have to. So once this is done, the government can now spend its unique tokens. They can spend pounds and in exchange for labor. And so people have now a means to pay those liabilities, and the government can resource itself with the labor and resources. Once the government has hired all the labor that is on offer, the people who are looking for jobs have a job, unemployment is resolved and eliminated. So the technical implications of this is that firstly, the UK government can never run out of pounds. And in fact, any government that issues its own currency can never run out of said currency. The UK government is not relying on taxes for revenue. Thirdly, the UK government can buy whatever resources and labor are available and for sale in its own currency. And at this point, people usually ask about inflation. And the third point really addresses that. So we're saying that the limit to what the government can spend in the economy is directly correlated with the available resources and labor that are for sale within the economy at a certain price. And the final point is basically to round this all up, the pound sterling or the currency is a tax credit. So why MMT? So we initially established that MMT is a lens and not a regime. It doesn't, however, mean that this doesn't present political opportunities. And as an engineer, I've just for point of clarification here, I've always believed that truth is pursuing for its own sake. MMT is worth understanding simply because it is the truth of how things work. And at the same time, from my background in talking to activists and politicians, I've realized that something being true isn't necessarily enough for people to be interested in it. So I decided to summarize here what opportunities understanding MMT actually opens up in terms of progressive policymaking. So MMT is important, in short, because it gives us a new way to look at the constraints that we make in policy. And Stephanie Kelton has a very good quote on that. She says, balance the economy, not the budget. So instead of balancing financial constraints of the government, we are actually balancing the available resources with the spending of the government, and that way ensuring that we have full employment and avoid inflation. So another point I want to say is, if this was a quote that Margaret Thatcher said in her speech in the Conservative Party conference in 1983. And I like this quote because it shows just how important the framing of the government as a financially constrained entity was to the introduction to our current neoliberal order. So she said the state has no source of money other than the money that people earn themselves. And if the state wishes to spend more, it can only do so by borrowing your savings or by taxing you more. There's no such thing as public money. There's only taxpayers' money. So this is what MMT is trying to break. In this world, and Rishi Sunak recently reiterated with a similar quote, effectively, these two quotes have the same meaning, that the government is a financially constrained entity, and therefore public services are a burden on you as an individual, and they cost you money and they're not a benefit. So in this framework, the government is an external entity and is extracting money from the economy, which is run and sustained entirely by individuals. But why am I showing you this? Why are the Conservatives, who are the party of austerity in the UK, so keen on us understanding money in this way? It's because it changes the way that we think about policy and we think about our constraints. So let's look, for example, at the way that we currently stabilize the economy. In the neoliberal approach, it is believed that full employment causes accelerating inflation, so that a certain level of unemployment is both unavoidable or natural in the market, and even desirable to avoid high levels of inflation. And they use the Phillips curve to illustrate this. So this has led to the use of monetary policy, that is the adjustment of interest rates as a means to maintain price stability and stabilize the economy. So the idea is that we encourage or discourage investment and by adjusting interest rates and therefore investment levels and consequently unemployment levels. And that way we stabilize private sector activity in booms and recessions. So the adverse implications of using monetary policy in this way are many, but the most politically significant in my view is that it basically accepts unemployment as a given, and it almost represents a sort of ritual sacrifice of vulnerable people to unemployment and poverty in order to presumably create a stable economy for those of us lucky enough to find employment. So, and it's very common, politicians and media pundits often resort to framing the unemployed as lazy or incapable, and as a means to justify lower levels of welfare support and really justify the continued existence of this system of worthy people and people who are unworthy. In the MMT view, it's completely different. Once you understand money in the way MMT does, you see that government is actually the result, the unemployment is a result of government policy failure. So those who do not have jobs are actually victims of a system that sets them out to lose. So what alternative method of stabilizing the economy does MMT propose? Here is the job guarantee is the only policy proposal that MMT has, and it offers a guaranteed offer of employment in the public sector.
Could you try again?
Sorry. Offer of employment in the public sector for anyone who wishes to take it.
It's all good.
It offers a socially inclusive wage, which becomes the effective minimum wage, and it replaces monetary policy as a main inflation control mechanism. So workers who are not needed in the private sector or who do not wish to work in the private sector, they will always have an offer of employment available for them in the public sector, which is appropriate to both their abilities and their circumstances. It would offer a socially inclusive wage, and this includes holidays and benefits such as sick leave. And it would act as an effective minimum wage because employers would have to compete with the job guarantee in order to get the workers that they need. So they would have to make an offer that is better than that which the job guarantee offers, which is would be the base level of the effective minimum wage. So the idea is that this is a centrally funded, locally administered program. The jobs are defined by the community that undertakes them, and I would encourage any job guarantee proposal to make this process as democratic as possible, the process of defining the jobs. And the job guarantee will take care of workers as they are, where they are, for as long as they wish. So there's no need to have to move in order to find a job. The benefits have many levels. At individual level, you have economic security for individuals, quality employment for individuals, and social inclusion. And the knowledge, of course, that you don't have to relocate their home or leave your hometown in order to be able to find a well-paying job. And it might be particularly beneficial to discriminated minorities, women, or groups that may require special working arrangements, and who, because of that, are often find it more difficult to find employment in the private sector. So for the community, the job guarantee also offers a means to address local needs that may be difficult for central governments to identify. And this way, it provides a certain degree of autonomy for communities to run their own economies. On the macroeconomy, we've already said the job guarantee is an economic stabilizer. So in the private sector, when activity is high, you would expect the pool of GG workers to shrink. And conversely, in bad times, the pool of GG workers would increase. this would automatically increase government spending in bad times and reduce it in good times to mitigate boom and bust cycles. And this is the way that it replaces monetary policy. So this also provides an increased level of certainty in the economy. The final takeaway from the job guarantee is that government created unemployment, so government should eliminate it. Finally, just on the subject of policy making, the job guarantee is not the solution to all our problems, but it is a crucial part of any progressive agenda. So there are subjects like MMT and the environment, and we've had plenty of wonderful work done by economists on how do we tackle the climate emergency. And it's clear that this is going to need quite a big effort and quite a reconfiguring of our economies. But this is going to create some industries that are going to benefit, and some industries are going to ultimately become obsolete. So in order to achieve this, we need to make sure that there is appropriate compensation in place for workers and appropriate transitioning for workers from one industry to the other. And really, by removing the budget constraint considerations, MMT can really make it easier for us to ensure that these measures are adequate and that support is available for those who would otherwise lose out from these initiatives. So in MMT and economic justice, when tax revenues stop being a prerequisite for public sector spending, we can take decisive actions to eliminate harmful industries or practices. And this is really a point to say that when progressives propose taxes on what they consider to be harmful industries in order to fund public services. For example, sometimes they propose a tax on financial speculation or on carbon emissions in order to fund some good in the economy like healthcare or social care, etc. But the problem with this approach is that if the tax is indeed successful at discouraging these damaging activities, then the revenue coming from these activities in taxes would be zero. And in that case, they would be useless as a means of funding anything. So what MMT does is it allows us to decouple both of these objectives. And so we can have the taxation policy based on what we consider to be harmful, and at the same time making arrangements to fund the things that we believe to be valuable to us in really two separate things. So in this way, it doesn't make the good dependent on the bad. And it gives us more flexibility to shape our economy and choose how much of it we want to run without profit motive. And on the same line, when tax revenues stop being a prerequisite for public sector spending, we can create a welfare system with human needs at heart instead of arbitrary budget constraints. This point on understanding where power is by understanding money is particularly relevant to countries that don't issue their own currencies, such as those in the Eurozone or some developing nations. And MMT really makes the whole structure of power more transparent and can help direct our efforts into key institutions. So finally, understanding money removes it as an obstacle so that we can focus on the things that are actually important. In MMT, we talk a lot about money, but it's because we actually want to make the money the least important thing in the economy. On the role of unions, unions have a crucial role in the demand for the job guarantee, obviously, and some proposals have already been put in place, although these are probably not ambitious enough. And if MMT could help make these proposals more ambitious, for sure. And again, even in a job guarantee world, union will continue to be crucial in safeguarding the quality and conditions of employment for jobs in the public and private sectors. So summary, the currency is a tax credit. The job guarantee replaces the monetary policy as a stabilisation mechanism, and understanding MMT expands our possibility for public policy making. So just to contradict what Margaret Thatcher said earlier, we would like to leave you with this one, which is there is no such thing as taxpayers' money. There is only public money. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. We don't have any Q&A questions under Q&A yet. I encourage all the audience to submit questions not only for Patricia, but also for Karen and for Derk. But in the interim, Karen and Derk, would you like to would you mute yourself and ask or make a comment, ask a question or make a comment about Patricia's very good introduction? Karen, have a go, please.
Yeah, am I muted? No, can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me, yeah. So I was interested to know if culturally this concept of the undeserving poor permeates South American society.
Oh, yes, it does. I think, yeah, more so probably, and it's probably, I mean, just as in the Western nations, quite heavily as well interlinked with racial stereotypes and discrimination. And this is the issue that it's framed entirely as an individual responsibility for finding employment, but nobody really talks about the fact that unemployment is inbuilt into the economic system as something necessary and even desirable. So yeah, there's a lot of victim blaming going on within the theory itself, and I think that has to change fundamentally. But yeah. I just don't think people have had another option like MMT, another way of looking at things.
Derk, do you want to unmute yourself and make a point?
Yeah, I have also a question. What about the British unions? Are they engaging with MMT? Is there any progress that they have picked it up and that they are starting maybe to understand? Because I think it can help them quite a lot.
Karen, I'm sure will illuminate us more into what the processes of party going through the politics of it and persuading people. But from what I've seen a lot of small initiatives trying to disseminate understanding of MMT and specifically why MMT might be useful to unions. I think at the beginning, we perhaps were having issues that the way that we were framing the debate, we didn't make it clear that unions would continue to be crucial. And unions, I think some of them reacted as feeling maybe threatened by the idea of a job guarantee. And so, it's absolutely crucial that we make it clear that the role of unions will continue to be important, and probably even more so, and that unions, I personally believe, will be strengthened by the job guarantee, because you have the job guarantee create more people that are employed, and people who are employed have bargaining power, and so more potential for union to have members with bargaining power. And as well, that people who are employed tend to be more involved in politics in general because they're more involved with their community and their community's needs. And that's the whole subject of social inclusion. Social inclusion isn't just, it's good for the individual. It's also good for communities and societies in general, I think.
Can I jump in with a question, Patricia? Moser especially stresses that the job guarantee is a residual phenomenon, is a residual thing. And along with that question, to some extent, social justice is all about getting or economic or social justice is about getting as many people into the middle class as possible. And of course, everyone's talking about, what we need is high-paying jobs. And how does the JG relate to that project? So those are two different questions.
Well, I think it's really important that we emphasize that, as you say, that the GG is meant to be a residual. Sometimes we call it the employer of last resort program, and I think that's absolutely right, because what is there really to do is a safety net for anybody who cannot, for one reason or another, find themselves out of work or unable to find work in the private sector, and or are between jobs, or so. But if you start, what we cannot do is place jobs within the job guarantee that are essential and that are essential services, public services for the nation. So if you think about it, the job guarantee itself has inbuilt within it quite a lot of flexibility. It gives those who are employed within it quite a lot of power to set their own time, their own hours, and how long they want to work for. So a lot of them will be on work on a temporary basis, and that's not really the way you want to run services that are essential. And so I think it would be very difficult for services, to run reliably if you are using job guarantee jobs in order to run them. So I think it'd be politically more difficult to do that, to try to do that, to put job guarantee jobs in the essential public services than people may think it is. But I still think that you might find people who might try to do that, and I do think that we need to be vigilant about that and ensure that the roles are very clearly separated.
And what about the question of its relationship to like a high wage strategy?
Well, so in terms of how the job guarantee might increase wages, well, in MMT, we talk about the state as a price setter, and one of the prices that it sets is that of labor. So by offering without a job guarantee, the price of labor, as set by the state, the minimum wage level is really zero, because some people can't find employment, so you can't. You don't have a wage. But once you elevate that to 15, and there's no way that anybody can drop that below, I say £15 because that's the level that we're discussing now. But you would see that the job guarantee wages would actually increase the price of labor as a whole, and that may be reflected in other sectors of the society, and you'd imagine all wages to adjust relative to the job guarantee in a positive way. And on the subject of the wage level as well, for the job guarantee, as I said, the job guarantee should offer a socially inclusive wage. We speak in the UK about a £15 an hour wage at the moment, but really it should be about, what is the minimum standard of living that we think an individual should have, and that should include the ability to go on holidays, the ability to, and benefits such as paid sick leave and paid holidays at the same rate, and a means to engage, for them to engage in activities with their community on a leisure basis as well as their main jobs. So all of those things should be included. If that's £15 an hour, great. It may need to be more than that, but or we could stagger it until we get to the right level of wages.
Karen, do you want to come? We've still got 4 minutes. Karen, do you want to jump back with another point or question? Can't hear you. You're on mute, Karen. Unmute yourself, Karen.
You're on mute. Yeah.
Sorry, I think you've covered some of the really important points of the job guarantee in your presentation, Patricia. So thank you very much for that.
Patricia, we've got a question which may be too specific, but I'll read it to you.
Okay.
There are two. A gentleman called David Ellerman. At first, he says, I have trouble understanding the whole job guarantee proposal since the USA has probably the largest federal jobs program with over 400 work sites around the world. I wonder if he's talking about the military. Yes, he is. And then, wouldn't it be more realistic proposal be to bring the boys home and turn the already funded armed forces into a huge public service corps working on rebuilding America's infrastructure? Well, Patricia, you can answer that one very well.
I mean, obviously, I like that. I don't think that, often, and I'm glad you bring up the military, because it's not just the US, but many countries as well usually propose the military as a last resort employer for people who can't find employment, and it ends up being really where a lot of people from poor backgrounds end up when they cannot find employment in the private sector. And I think that's both unfair and unnecessary. Really, I mean, the army isn't really, it's questionable whether it is a productive means of using our resources, whether there are, as you say, better things to do at home to care for the people that in the country, to care for the elderly, to care for children, to improve education services, etc. So there's a lot to do at home without us having to worry about further increasing our potential for destruction elsewhere in the world. So I think that sometimes, but you're absolutely right, the military has often been used sort of as a makeshift job guarantee, especially at times of war. And I think that, you know, what we're basically doing is, okay, offer a job, but not in the military. Offer it in the community where you can make a positive impact to the lives of us all, basically.
I think David, we're all in agreement with your sentiment.
Right.
We have less than a minute. Derk, do you want to jump in with a final comment or question to Patricia?
Yeah, maybe you can clarify once more how the job guarantee is helping to decommodify work, because I mean normally we would think that work can only be bought by pounds, and then you have to turn a profit, right? And now with the job guarantee, that's not the case anymore. Maybe you can just give us 2 or 3 sentences to summarize that.
Wow. Okay. Well, I think that I mean, first of all, the job guarantee gives people an option from having to engage in the private market at all. If somebody's ideologically opposed to working in the private sector, then they don't have to, right? They always have an offer of employment in the public sector for them that pays a good wage. And ultimately, really, I mean, the job guarantee as part of an MMT understanding also gives us more flexibility to decide how much of our economy, you know, we run for the community and how much of it we run for a profit motive, because you no longer have to use taxation as a means of funding. Then the government activities and public sector services are not really dependent on private profits and therefore revenue streams from that end. So I think that's my 2 cents on that.
Well, thank you very much, Patricia. That was an excellent presentation, and you made a good introduction and justification of the job guarantee. I just want to encourage all our audience to submit questions under the Q&A tab, and we're keen to have your participation. And just finally, Patricia, unfortunately, will have to leave about 15 minutes before the very end because she has another panel to go to immediately. But again, thank you, Patricia. And now we're going to turn to Karen, who has very kindly agreed to step in at the last minute. And I'll let her introduce herself and then give her a presentation. So over to you, Karen.
So hello, everyone. I am Karen van Sweden, and I am the Executive Director at Modern Money Scotland. And I'm also a co-host at Scotonomics, which is a YouTube channel where we try and bring on economists of all shades, including MMT economists, to talk about the economy and also how it relates to Scottish economics as well. So today I want to talk about how I have been busy promoting the job guarantee, which I think is a great idea. So I am both an ecological activist and an activist for Scottish independence. Currently, I am a plaintiff in the Paid to Pollute campaign, and I am on the SNP Policy Development Committee, and I am in the SNP Common Weal group as well. So in 2018, I began studying economics to be a better advocate for Scottish independence, and I came across the idea of MMT and the concept of job guarantee. So I have very long experience of poor employment practices in its many and varied forms, and I have also experienced the feelings of fear and inadequacy of unemployment. And this is perhaps why I am so passionate about the job guarantee. In April 2020, we formed Modern Money Scotland with Craig Berry and Cameron Archibald. We worked on the job guarantee paper, and I worked on publicising our work to a greater audience. Then I put myself forward last year as a candidate for the SNP Policy Development Committee, as I would like to see much more policy coming out of the northeast of Scotland, which is where I hail from. So this has increased my profile, as has in appearing in numerous podcasts, writing a blog, and pestering journalists as well. So we published our paper at the beginning of this year, and that was the beginning. And then it was time to work on a resolution for the SNP conference. Cameron and I are both members of the Scottish National Party. So when the resolution has to be defined by the Policy Development Committee, and then it has to be chosen by the Conference Committee. So these are the hoops that we have to jump through before eventually it's going to reach conference. So we got some coverage from the National, which is the newspaper in Scotland that supports Scottish independence. And then eventually it was confirmed as being on the conference agenda. So then we really had to work on the sale of this policy to our membership. And that was in the form of Cameron and I's speeches. So I thought I would try and get the film of me doing the speech. But that was quite difficult to do technically. I was struggling with that. So what I thought I would do is read out the speech. So to put you in the frame of mind, this is this is what I said as the seconder to Cameron's first for the SNP conference, which was in September. So conference. It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult. Lucius Annius Seneca. Conference. Margaret Thatcher's hatred of Scotland was amply demonstrated through her infliction of a slow form of torture upon our community. That is mass, long-term, involuntary unemployment with the resulting mass insecurity, isolation, and loss of dignity, which has trickled down through generations. The resulting societal toxicities are well researched and they have rippled out through our communities. Insecurity dealt with by self-medication, loss of social capital and connection due to isolation, and anger and violence fueled by lost dignity. However, Thatcher understood what public money could do, which is why she denied that it even existed. Involuntary unemployment and austerity have always been policy choices, but never a necessity in a fiat currency world. But conference, we don't just have an unemployment problem, we have an employment problem too. And some of you may have experienced poor or abusive working conditions. I've experienced all of these, and this is why I second a job guarantee pilot. Many of the accepted economic paradigms have recently been blown out of the water. The most nefarious being that the UK government can run out of the currency that it alone creates. That austerity had to be imposed, and that involuntary unemployment is something that has to be endured by some in the mistaken pursuit of low inflation. The pandemic has demonstrated that central governments can always be employers of last resort. And during this pandemic, some of you were paid to stay at home and stop our hospitals from overflowing. Care is diminished or ignored by the neoclassical economic paradigm. It is deeply misogynistic and treats our natural world as a dominion to be conquered. But care for people, our environment and communities sits in the heart of our proposal for a job guarantee, as does increased community level democratic participation. The pandemic and the threats of climate change demonstrate that there is a lot of work to do, and a recent poll by the Global Commons Alliance revealed that 83% of people are willing to do more to become better planetary stewards and protect and regenerate the global commons. For Scotland, involuntary unemployment has been toxic for our environment and for our planet. It cannot be countenanced. Conference, please support this resolution. So that was my conference speech in September, and it really came from the heart. I have been unemployed. I have been in precarious work. I have been mistreated by employers. This is common for women in our world. So yes, I feel very passionate about the job guarantee. And these are the hoops that we had to jump through to get this to conference and to get it passed as a resolution. And it wasn't without difficulty. There were some people who wanted to make changes to our resolution as well. So it wasn't an easy process. The next process after that now is I will try and get myself elected back onto the Policy Development Committee, and I will try to get the policy actually formed as a pilot, because as you know, Scotland is not monetarily sovereign. That's what I would like. I would like my country to be making its own decisions, running its own central bank and currency, and so that it's not currency restricted anymore. And then we can really crack on with actually having a job guarantee that is really universal in Scotland. What I want to try and do over the next year, perhaps even longer, is demonstrate that we can have a pilot up and ready, look at maybe problems that might occur, so that when Scotland does become an independent country, we have this policy, as they say in the British government just now, oven ready and ready to go. That's what I really want to try and achieve over the next year. So these are the hoops that you have to jump through to get your policy to conference of your political party that you're involved with. I would recommend everyone is joined into a political party, because this is where policy happens, and policy has to go forward then towards your legislator, wherever that is, if it's the House of Commons in England, or if it's the Scottish Parliament, which legislates for some things. You will know, some of the audience will know that some things are reserved and some things are devolved, some things that we can do in the Scottish Parliament, but some things not. So I am very passionate about the job guarantee, probably from very personal reasons of understanding why it would be so important for so many people. I think for me as well, as a woman, I think it's very important because there's a lot of abuse of women in the workplace, and I think that they should always have a safe place to find work. I think it's really important for women, especially a job guarantee, but it's important for everyone. So I'm a little bit short. I'm only coming up to about 11 minutes, and I don't really have anything else to say. Perhaps the audience would like to ask some questions. I can't hear you, David, you're on mute, and so is everyone else.
I found your conference speech very inspiring, and I think it's obvious to me why you passed, because it was such a powerful presentation, and I salute you and your colleagues for getting the SNP to take the first step in making a job guarantee part of your program. I have several questions to ask, but let me turn it over to whether, Patricia, you're not muted. Do you want to start by making a comment or asking a question of Karen?
Well, I just was curious, really. Had a question. You know, what are the main obstacles that you found, or resistance that you found to this policy? Did you encounter any, and how did you overcome them?
So I think that what's worrying for a lot of people, a few years ago, the SNP passed a resolution to support a universal basic income. So you all probably know that that's not a policy that I support anymore. I did support it in the past until I started learning MMT in 2018. So, but there's really no point in riling other members about that issue. This is not even something that can be contemplated until we're monetarily sovereign, as could a universal job guarantee. But what we can do is demonstrate the efficacy of this idea just now. We can do this just now. We are currency limited because you know, that's our situation. But yeah, the next thing is to try and persuade the Scottish Government to put some money towards a pilot, and that's what we have to do over the next little while. I think I digressed slightly, Patricia. Did I answer? Yeah, no, I think the other thing that's important, I think, for a lot of people with this policy is to really emphasise the fact that this is voluntary. you choose it, it's voluntary. We have had such bad experiences in the UK. For example, when, you know, David Cameron first got into power, you know, they were literally using unemployed people to fill the gaps in places like Pound Stretcher or in recycling plants and things like that as well. So, you know, people see this idea of a job guarantee as, again, being having nasty, sometimes dangerous, bad work forced upon you by the government. And, you know, this is in no way something that is forced upon you at all. It's a voluntary choice. And our vision of it, which we make very clear in the paper, and of course, politicians can do what they want with a policy. All we can do is put forward the idea. But our vision is that hopefully it would bring some extra democracy to Scotland. I don't know if people are aware of just how anemic our democracy is in Scotland. So what we want is that it will be controlled at a community council level, and the community councils will know more about what's happening in their area, as will non-governmental organisations in that area as well, and we can look at really what's required. So, for example, an example of that would be Sustrands are busy in Scotland as well. I know they started off in Bristol. I've always been a supporter. I'm a keen cyclist, and you know, if they're building a local cycle path, you know, and they want some extra labour, then, you know, the job guarantee could help provide that. That's the kind of thing that we're thinking of. You know, it's small infrastructure projects like that, things that are going to improve our environment. But, you know, we're very clear about this. These are jobs that are not necessary. These are not replacement jobs for a civil service, which frankly is anemic also. You know, if you look at the civil service in the UK, we have 16.3% of our population, our working age population, working in the civil service in the UK. If you look across the water to our neighbours in Norway and Denmark, it's closer to 30%. So, you know, there's a long way to go to making our civil service the civil service that it really should be, and the level of public sector employment. And then on a democratic level, again, in Norway, you have one councillor for every 700 people. In Scotland, where I live, in Aberdeen, Donside, we have one councillor for 4,500 people. In Leith, which was much more heavily populated, we have one councillor for 8,500 people. In England, you've got a slightly better situation. It's one councillor for about 2,500 people. So democracy is anemic. People feel separated from democracy for a reason. That is because they have very few advocates in their communities. So I think the job guarantee can be something that can increase local democracy. I feel very strongly that it will be able to do that, and show what's possible within small communities, when they take control of what's happening around about them, rather than very centralised government. You know, I really want to see that subsidiarity happen in Scotland. Everywhere, I want to see that happen everywhere. I think people are scared of job guarantee because they think it's something that will be forced on them. And I think when you paint the picture of it that we have in the paper, I think that hopefully they'll see it as a positive.
Derk, do you want to jump in now?
Yeah. So I would also be interested in the question whether the employers like it and whether the unions like it, because, I mean, theoretically, we always stress that the job guarantee is good for the employers because they can hire out of the job guarantee pool and they don't have to hire the long-term unemployed. And I mean, in terms of unions, it's kind of obvious that once you put some kind of job guarantee program into practice, that it sets a new floor, and hopefully this floor is higher than the minimum wage. So the whole wage structure will be shifted upwards. So did you have any contacts with unions or employer associations?
Yeah, so we have in the SNP a union group, SNP union group. So yeah, they're enthusiastic about the policy as well. I think for employers, I think it's a long-held belief for employers that if they have this pool of unemployed people, it puts them at an advantage. But the data doesn't support that, does it? You know, it clearly shows that, you know, you have people when they're unemployed for longer periods of time, then they become unemployable to employers, and then employers start picking off people who are already employed. So the whole concept of having this pool of unemployed people as being advantageous for employers is a nonsense. And again, I want to reiterate it, the data does not support that at all. So of course it's better that you keep people employed. The other thing as well, I think, with that concept too, is that the other advantage I see very quickly with the job guarantee is that, for example, if you lose your job in Aberdeen, where I live, say you're in the oil industry, job guarantee is not going to give you the kind of money that you're going to earn in the oil industry. Absolutely not. But you do have the choice of staying in Aberdeen. If you have an elderly parent or you have children at a school and you don't want to pull them out of that school, you have a choice. But the other thing that you wanted to say about unions as well, I mean, one of the reasons I would say about unions is that unions are very busy often in jobs that are actually in a lot of ways quite stable. You know, I didn't really find they were very active in the places that I worked in, which were very unstable. So I think for people in catering businesses, people in retail, these kind of places, the job guarantee absolutely guarantees a life without precarity. And it's this life with precarity that I think also is leading to people self-medicating through drugs and alcohol, through you know, the mental illness that we're seeing being extrapolated through this pandemic, you know, this precarity, which again, I think a lot of employers think it's good for them. And, you know, again, this just doesn't stand up to the evidence. So I think that, of course, it's good for employers. We can see that from the evidence. It will be good. They will be able to pick people off of employment, which is keeping people, giving them that sense of dignity, keeping them socialized, doing something useful in their community, which again adds to their dignity as well. And then when they're ready and the right job comes up, and say it's in the right place for them as well, because they don't want to move their children out of the school that they're in or move their children from their friends, then, you know, it's there for them. They can wait for the right job. And when they wait for the right job, the employer finds the right employee.
Karen, one of the most difficult questions I think for MMT people is the level of benefit available in a JG situation. So, I mean, it's a very tricky moral, ethical question. If you refuse a JG job, what sort of welfare benefits would you still be entitled to? Did you and Cameron tackle this issue, and or even just on general terms, you want to say something about that?
Well, you know, I think we make it clear in the paper that, you know, this is a policy that we see alongside dignified social security. And we don't have dignified social security in the UK. Again, you know, Derk would maybe know better about this as well. But, you know, I lived in the Netherlands for 5 years. They have a dignified social security system. So, for example, when you become unemployed, you don't go from earning, say, if you're lucky enough to earn 30 or 40,000 pounds a year, to 89 pounds a week. That does not happen in the Netherlands. You get a 90% of your last wage, you know, so, and it is gradually taken down. So people, if they can't find another job that was as well paid, they can slowly change their lifestyles, you know, in order to cope with the fact that they're going to maybe be unemployed for longer than they were initially. So in an unemployment Scotland with its own currency, we can guarantee this kind of level of dignity within the social security system. Although the Scottish government currently do a pretty good job, considering the government that we have down in Westminster, the governments that we haven't voted for a Conservative government since 1955 in Scotland. So we continually get these right-wing governments that we don't vote for here.
But to talk to me more about just tell me more how you begin to think about the level of benefits that would be available alongside a JG.
Well, I would like to see something similar to the Netherlands. That is this a more logical way of tackling unemployment, that you gradually pare people down from what their previous wage was to you know, a more reasonable unemployment level of payment. You know, something that is going to, you know, pay for your food. You're going to have a very basic lifestyle, but you have a roof over your head. but perhaps you're not going to be able to afford that new computer. Those are the kind of things that you can do when you're in work. And again, if you're in a job guarantee, those are the kind of things that you maybe want to do. So if you have to go right down to those types of benefits after a while, then maybe the job guarantee is going to look more attractive for you. I have to say that for me personally, and I think a lot of people would be alongside me with this, that would be my first choice. I would prefer to work and do something in my community than to fall back on unemployment benefits. I find the idea of being paid by the state to do nothing is deeply unattractive to me. I really think that, you know, I want to do something to help my tribe fundamentally.
We've got a question from the audience, which is, I think, is a very good question. And it's something I think that all MMT people need to think about. I'm going to read it to you, and then I'll add something. It's the question is from, or comment is from, a person called Michael Louis Key Song, and this person, and the comment is, an important fear of the job guarantee is that it increases the role of the state, which a lot of people, it's something that concerns a lot of people where governments are not very democratic. And if I could just add to that, Minsky advocates a big bank and a big state. But of course, we don't. Even in a democratic state, there are problems with a big state. I think that's worth thinking about. And I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think also it's, you know, this is a policy that we're putting forward to our politicians to embrace. Who you put in as politicians is up to people. You know, people have to. Politics is not a spectator sport. You have to be involved, and I do try and encourage my friends to get as involved as possible. I think it's quite a frightening spectator sport for a lot of them, but I think it's more frightening if you allow the wrong people to get into power. And I would say that's the situation that we are in the UK at the moment right now. You know, I think that the government that we have in the UK is the most right-wing libertarian one that we've ever had. So. Yeah, people must participate in the political process to ensure that the politicians that you get in, and I'm talking right down at a branch level. So, you know, when you have a hustings at a branch level, the people that put themselves up as candidates, you ask them the important questions. You try and find out the nature of them. What's the reason they want to get into politics? Because there are certain people that want to get into politics that clearly are attracted to the idea of the money and the prestige that it brings. And then there's other people probably who you should push forward into being your elected representatives because they're quite frightened by it, but actually they've got a lot of stuff going underneath the hood that you want to push forward. So, you know, right down at that level where your branch hustings, you know, choosing your right candidates, that's what I'm talking about as well. So the people that you put forward to get into power, that's so important. And if few people are involved in that, and they are in this country, there's too few people involved in that, then yes, you're going to get some politicians you're not going to be happy with. So you must scrutinize, deeply scrutinize the people that you're going to put into power.
But this person asks us to think specifically about undemocratic countries, very undemocratic countries, where the rulers are presumably not very nice, who might use the JG as for all sorts of nefarious ends. Is there anything we can say about that from?
I guess the only thing you can do if you're a think tank like Modern Money Scotland is put the concept forward and hope that that's not going to happen. That's all you can do. As far as the democratic process is concerned, I would say, well, in England, you know, you only have first past the post. We have pretty much the same situation in England that you have in the US, where it's, you know, it's your blue or your red. That's your choice, really. So I would say to English people, get involved in the Electoral Reform Society because you need to have proportional representation. You know, this is what they have in Europe. We need to have proportional representation in the UK and anywhere else. So if you have a poor democratic process, yeah, that's going to give you poor results.
But in one last point, even in a virtuous democratic country, the JG has the potential for creating this huge JG bureaucracy. How do we avoid sort of the downside of a vast bureaucracy?
Well, you know, yeah, I mean, downside of a large bureaucracy. What is a large? I would question what is a large bureaucracy. You know, so certainly it's not something we have in the UK. Some people might argue that perhaps the Scandinavian countries have a large bureaucracy. I see that they function much better. So, you know, what is your perception of a large bureaucracy? You know, again, don't treat politics as a spectator sport. If you're not happy with things, join with groups. You know, that is the best way to go forward. You know, if you don't want to be politically specific, then, you know, join Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, people like this, various other organizations. But, you know, if you're really serious, then join a political party. And yes, you are going to be compromised from day one. That is the nature of it. You know, there are policies you're not going to like in any party that you join. All you can do is go into it and push your ideas as far forward as you possibly can, and do that as forcefully as possible.
Oh, well, we've come up to 12. I want to thank Karen very much for a lovely half hour. It's very illuminating, and congratulations to the SNP and your gang within the SNP for getting so far with the JG. You know, clearly to all of us, it's a hugely important measure, and we salute the fact that you've gotten so far as you have. So again, thank you very much, and thank you for the questioner. So at this point, I want to hand over for the final half hour to Derk, and he will introduce himself and tell us what he's going to talk about, and then give his presentation. So over to you, Derk.
Yeah, thanks, David. So I will talk about mainly a paper that I wrote with Pavlina Tcherneva and Esteban Cruz. So it's about the Euro Treasury and the job guarantee, and how this would be instituted or how this would be created inside the Eurozone if it would ever happen. So this paper was written before the pandemic broke out. And well, we have already seen what the job guarantee looks like. So let me just briefly explain what the Eurozone looks like, so that you have some kind of idea. So the Eurozone is a bit special because we have just one central bank, which is the European Central Bank based at Frankfurt in Germany. But we have 19 treasuries. Okay, so this is a very strange situation that you probably can refer to it if you are from the United Kingdom, because you also have one central bank and then you have more than one treasury, or you have more than one parliament at least. So it's a bit complicated. The thing is that the central bank, the ECB, is not the only institution that is a central bank in a way. So we still have those national central banks. So if you want to be precise, the central bank, just like the Bank of England in the UK, for the Europeans, that would be the ECB plus the national central banks. So we call that the Euro system. And all these national central banks, they can still create euros. And that is a bit confusing, because normally we have this idea that there's one currency and one country. And so you would directly normally ask, so you have German euros and then you have French euros, right? No, we don't. So they all create euros. And these euros that they are creating can be used to make payments all over the Eurozone. Okay, so the ECB is setting interest rates as a central bank, but the banks which are in Germany have their account still with the national central bank, with the German Bundesbank. And those who are in Spain, they have their account with the Banco de España, which is the Spanish central bank. Okay, so this is a very strange setup. And the thing is that when in the 90s, which were very neoliberal, the Europeans decided to move forward with the euro idea, they kind of thought, well, we just need the central bank to stabilize the economy. Okay, so they were believing that the monetary policy alone would be enough to stabilize the economy, that it could manage aggregate demand in a way that we would have full employment and price stability. And that never materialized. Okay, so By now, I can tell you that the euro, which was created in 2002 in terms of the currency and handing out cash, exchange rates were fixed in 99. But the Eurozone is a policy failure. So the unemployment rate in the Eurozone has never fallen below 7%, not once. Okay, so we have mass unemployment all the way. It's 20 years now almost of mass unemployment. And of course, the distribution matters. So when you have mass unemployment mostly in Germany, like before the global financial crisis, so I'm talking about the 2000s here, well, we have a strong welfare state in Germany. It's being made smaller and smaller, but it's still strong. And there was not a lot of political problems there. But after 2008, 2009, the unemployment rates went up in countries like Spain, Greece, and also in Italy, for example. And their welfare systems were not so generous. So the unemployment problem is more of a problem when it happens in the south than when it happens in the north. Okay, so what we can see then is that also we have undershooting in terms of inflation. So inflation rates should be a little less than 2%. Well, they now change it to exactly 2% in the medium term. But we have been consistently undershooting these inflation rates. So this means that we have some kind of macroeconomic policy failure. And I think at the center of this is the question, who is politically responsible for unemployment? Okay, so in our countries, normally, when you're not happy, when you're unemployed, and when you think that unemployment is a problem, you can just vote for a different party, a party saying, we want to fix the unemployment problem by just spending more or taxing less, or a combination of the two. Then, of course, you have a political choice. But in the Eurozone, that's not possible. Why not? Well, because on the national level, we have the Stability and Growth Pact, which is a European construct. So it says that you're not allowed to have government deficits, which is the difference between government spending and taxation, so tax revenues. That cannot be above 3% of GDP. And the problem with that, of course, is that governments do not control the budget deficit. Okay, so if you have a pandemic, for example, like last year, then of course tax revenues will go down by quite a lot. And that means you will have huge public deficits, which you're not supposed to have. So in the last crisis, so I'm talking about the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009, and the aftermath, the European central banks thought, well, it's their problem. Okay, so if Greece, if they have high public deficits, it's their problem. Then if public bonds from Greece, if government bonds from Greece go down in price, it's their problem. So the Greeks ran out of money at some point. Well, why did that happen? Well, because the way that we are using government spending in the Eurozone is that we need government bonds. So if they are sold to private banks, then the Greek government can get extra money, which means that the Central Bank of Greece can spend on behalf of the Greek government. Okay, so just like the MMT story says, when the Greek government makes its payment, same as in Germany, same as in the UK, same as in the US, the central bank is always crediting accounts. Okay, so the question is again, on the national level, what is stopping governments from following a full employment target? And that's the Stability and Growth Pact. When you are cutting down government spending because you have to, because you are above the deficit, and then the Greeks were forced to have austerity policies. They had a referendum in which they democratically rejected austerity policies. They got them anyway, which was a breaking point in the European Union, I would say. So I think we would be suffering from the consequences of that some more in this decade. But that's the problem there. So you cannot address the unemployment problem on the national level because your government will say we cannot spend what we would have to spend to have full employment because of the deficit limits. Because an increase in government spending also makes the economy a more hotter economy, and that means tax revenues might go up as well. It's not clear whether this is a political argument or an economic one. Probably a mixture, bit of both, I guess. So if you are frustrated then by your national government and you say, well, how about the European elections? Well, in the European elections, then you can vote for parties in Brussels. But they will quickly tell you that the budget of the European Union is roughly 1% of European GDP. So that is not enough to have counter-cyclical fiscal policy, meaning that in times of economic distress, you have more government spending coming from Brussels. And in times of I don't know, boom, they pull back a little bit. Okay, so We had a reform on the European level, the Next Generation EU program, but it's just a couple of billion euros here, a couple of billion euros there. So that's still not enough. So politically, we are in a very tight spot. So we are really between, I think we are between a rock and a hard place. Okay, so the rock being full European integration. So we could, of course, say, let's go big and let's have a European Treasury, which I'll explain in a minute. Or we could say, let's go back to national currencies and then we can just spend whatever we want to. Okay, these are the two choices. But the problem is politically, people don't like either of these choices. Okay, so we're stuck in the Eurozone. Even the Greek population, for example, when it came to the referendum and the no, and the European Commission still sending in the Troika, still people liked the euro and they wouldn't want to get out of the euro. Okay, so in terms of what is politically possible, of course, that has to be respected. That, of course, does not mean that if you have some kind of strong ideas and you want to move into some kind of direction, of course, in a political system, we have representative democracies. Of course, you can do something which the majority of your population doesn't want. Okay, so I'm not saying that there's somehow a problem in terms of the EU or the national countries cannot act. I'm just saying that it might be unpopular, at least in the short term. Okay, so the problem is then we have a dysfunctional situation that people are not happy with the unemployment rates. For example, youth unemployment in Spain is more than 1/3. Okay, so it's above 30%. Unemployment rates in Greece are also on a general level above 10% almost all of the time, and they were up to 25% probably 5 years ago. So this cannot be addressed, and it's not the politicians' fault. Okay, so that's a problem that we have in the Eurozone. So one solution, of course, is to go back to national currencies, as I said, but it's going to be difficult. You have to talk about what you do with euro-denominated debt. So it's easy to understand what you will have to do. Because we all had national currencies already, there's no question of how we can create them. Okay, so we just go back to 1999, before exchange rates were fixed, or maybe before 2002 when the euro was introduced. So we just collect taxes again in national currencies. Everybody knows how that works. So what would be the other option? What would it look like if we would create a euro treasury? So in this paper that we wrote together, we said, let's think about what would happen if we introduce a European job guarantee, which is European Union wide, and it's financed by the euro treasury. Okay, so the question then is, of course, where is the money coming from? So the European Commission is our European government, and it's not really a democratically elected government because it lacks some of the democratic aspects. Okay, so the Parliament, for example, has no right to have a vote of no confidence, and we have this so-called democratic deficit, which is with us for decades now. So the European Union is just not very democratic. It's a supranational structure, and it's a big experiment. So it was always thought of as something which is like a structure, and you build upon that structure. But in the end, it was always clear that the tighter and ever what was the name? There was always to be more integration. Okay, so an ever closer union, I think were the words. So that was always meant to mean that there will be in the end a United States of Europe, and that meant that the supranational structure would make place for a democratic structure, a proper one. So this is also what we wrote about. So if you have a euro treasury, and if they can issue euro bonds, which the ECB can buy up without any limit, because it's not a national government, and it's also not a European Union institution. So we suggest that the euro treasury would be some kind of institution which is formally outside of the European Union. So if that is the case, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be that, that means that the ECB again can act as a dealer of last resort for those euro bonds. So then the euro treasury can always make sure that whoever gets the money through euro bond issuance, that this kind of money can be spent. Okay, so technically you can draft a system just like in the US or the UK. So you can kind of force the European government to issue a government bond at the moment when they spend. So the ECB is crediting some bank account at the same time a euro bond is born. Okay, so that of course would give a lot of possibilities to spend to the European government. And the question then is, who decides what the job guarantee will look like on the ground? And we thought, just like Karen said about Scotland, that in order to have more democracy, we would like to give that power to those at the very lower end. So we want to make this a regional kind of community level policy. Okay, so there will be a kind of job bank. So at the local level, some kind of board will decide what kind of job guarantee jobs are available, and they are all paid for by Brussels. Okay, so Brussels, they have no say in who will get what kind of job. So all of this is decided at ground level. That's the idea. So we give a lot of power back to the communities, and they can decide what they will use these people for who are looking for a job guarantee job. Okay, so it's really up to them. If they think about care work, if they think about Green New Deal kind of stuff, if they think about some kind of historical job, if they want to, so if they're interested in learning about their own history, for example, it's up to them. And then, of course, we already have in place mechanisms in the European Union where, for example, they check what kind of what happened with the government money that they spent. Okay, so if you are afraid of job guarantee jobs popping up somewhere which are kind of corrupt and maybe they're not good job guarantee jobs, well, all government spending in the European Union is checked anyway, or at least most of it, and you can make deeper checks. Okay, so we have this kind of infrastructure in place, and yeah, that again means that at the local level you can have and create those jobs, and you don't have to worry about fiscal deficits and payment, because it's just that the European government will then make those payments for you. Okay, so they give you the money, you transfer the money to those people in the job guarantee program. Because otherwise you would end up with some kind of vicious circle where you have lots of unemployment, then you're paying job guarantee jobs, their wages, and then of course you end up with higher deficits, and that means you have to cut jobs somewhere else, or you have to cut spending. So in that sense, the job guarantee would be great because it addresses these unemployment problems. So it would be independent from where the unemployment happens. So you could also use the European Union's ideas about fundamental rights of EU citizens and say, well, there's a right to work. It's enshrined in the fundamental treaty of the European Union somewhere. And it doesn't matter where you are. If you can't find a job in the private sector or in the public sector, well, then it's the lack of jobs. It's not your fault. I mean, if you're willing to work and you want to work, yeah, well, then you can find a job then with a job guarantee, and that makes it a little bit easier to sell politically, I would assume, because it's in the end it's an insurance scheme. Okay, so we don't know where unemployment rates will go up next. Will it be Germany? Will it be Spain or Cyprus? We just don't know. And the other good part about this kind of setup is that there's no tax payments made before this happens. Okay, so there's no question of how this kind of job guarantee, which is EU-wide, is somehow financed. So the problem normally in the European Union, as well as in the Eurozone, is that people don't want to they don't want to see other countries spend more money and their own country doesn't spend more. So that's a big problem. So they're always afraid that taxpayers have to pay the bill, which of course is neoliberal talk. They don't finance anything. But again, the good thing is that if you increase government spending, and it's basically money that the ECB creates when it spends, then everybody who will pay higher taxes afterwards, it's because you have higher revenues. Okay, so it's going to be people who will have income instead of having no income or very little income. They will pay more taxes, yes. Also, the stuff, so goods and services that people buy, those who are in the job guarantee program, they buy stuff from firms. The firms will have higher revenues. They will pay more taxes. Okay, so those who will pay more taxes as a result of introducing the job guarantee on the European level, they won't complain because all these additional tax payments are caused by additional spending by the government. So as we already understand, of course, every public deficit is matched by a private sector surplus. And if you tax away a little bit of that private sector surplus, I guess that nobody will complain about that. Okay, so the problem normally with going forward with some kind of national policy trying to address these kind of problems of poverty and unemployment is that there's no consensus, and it's very difficult to do. So I think that the only government which did it in this pandemic was the Spanish government, which created a minimum income in Spain. I think the minimum income is, if I'm not mistaken, roughly 400 euros per household. But I think it's only paid for a limited amount of time, and it's very little. So it's per household, probably not enough even to pay the rent. So you can do this kind of social policy on the national level, but as I said, normally you run into this problem of trying to find the fiscal space because of the Stability and Growth Pact rules. Okay, so this fiscal space is just created by the European rules that we have. So again, forcing governments to run a budget surplus, that is what is making it so difficult for national governments to address these unemployment problems. And that, of course, forces them, and I'm trying to return to the decommodification issue of labor. So if you believe that in our societies, we need to spend more money towards the public purpose and employ people so that we can have a better world, a better planet, a better society, better communities, then of course those deficit rules will kill you. Okay, so this is what stops us from getting where we want to be. So, and it's only fair in a democracy that if people say we want to have more money being spent towards the public purpose and less money being spent towards profit, private profit, we can clearly see this in the healthcare system. So in Germany, we have a hybrid system, and everybody is amazed that German hospitals are profit maximizers. It doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. And in the UK, you have the National Health Service, which is great, at least as an idea. I know that they're chopping away at it. But of course, I mean, you have to have this kind of mission-driven approach. I mean, the mission is to make everybody healthy again. And that's what you want to achieve. And it doesn't matter whether you have a profit there or a loss. It's the same with primary schools, for example. I mean, why should that be profitable? And there used to be a very broad consensus, a political consensus of all parties, that of course there are some things connected mostly to infrastructure that the state would do. And yeah, I think that therefore this idea of moving forward with the Euro Treasury and connecting it to the job guarantee would help the Eurozone and would help the European Union to become a better continent. That's the idea. But I have to admit that politically, it should all be about stabilization of the euro right now, because the whole thing is more or less, there's forces that make it fall apart. And this idea to move forward with the United States of Europe, I think it's not a good idea right now, because also of the austerity policies imposed by mostly the German government in the last decade. So that's why it's not going to happen, I guess. But I think it's still there. So if people would like it, why not? Well, that's all. Thank you.
Derk, that was excellent. Thank you so much. The EU is such a labyrinth. I thank you for helping us negotiate at least mentally. So now I want to turn this over to question and answers. And I encourage all the audience to send in questions under the Q&A function. And in fact, I've got two questions right now. And the first one is from someone called Sam Hummel. And he says, can the taxes pay back the bonds in full? Won't the taxes collected on the job guarantee income always be less than 100% of the income paid out from the bonds issued to provide the job guarantee income? So that's your first question, Derk.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I think we'll never find an answer because we don't have the statistics to do that. So we cannot follow the euros through the system. So if I pay somebody who is in a job guarantee program, if I pay that person 1,000 euros, I lose track of those euros. I will never know how many taxes this person paid. I don't know what the person did with that kind of money. Maybe the person used it to pay a tax bill from the past, so to the full extent. So maybe all of it goes back. But maybe the person is just spending it, and then there will be some multiplier process. So you spend, and then you pay VAT. and then the other person gets an income, and the other person spends again. Another part goes towards VAT or income taxes. So the point of the job guarantee and the spending is that the job guarantee is made real by spending money. And then the question whether you want to tax more or less, it depends on the macroeconomic situation. But I mean, we already have some tax rates, and if you would look at a country like Austria, so Austria roughly has a tax share in GDP of 40%. So that means roughly that every single euro that you spend into the economy, about 40% is coming back in the form of taxes inside the year, roughly. So that means that there is no reason to say that because we have this job guarantee, we need higher tax rates or something. As I said, we have mass unemployment, and that also means that if, for example, in the Eurozone, if maybe 5 million people are taking up this job guarantee program, then of course they create jobs for at least another 5 million people in the private sector because demand is going up. Okay, so because we had inflation rates that were too low and also unemployment rates which were too high in the past, it's very likely that there won't be any kind of macroeconomic trouble resulting from this.
Thank you very much, Derk. The next question is related to Dirk's presentation, but it's actually directed at Karen. So Karen, this is a question from Dominic Mayer, and he asks, what do you think, would a European ECB job guarantee and a de-neoliberalized EU make the S&P consider joining the Eurozone after splitting with England?
Okay, so the SNP is a party, as I'm constantly pointing out to members. So I think what this gentleman is asking with the leadership, or it's that. So from that point of view, it's a party. It has to come up with policies, and those policies then go to the legislator, and they're debated by the whole legislator. So whether the actual Scottish government, the Parliament, would decide on that, I don't know, because that would be a decision. We have proportional representation. That would be a combination of parties. If you want to know how I feel about it, I can tell you. So I would. We have been in a currency union with England for over 300 years, and I would say it's not been a good experience for Scotland. So yeah, it's not something that I would particularly advocate for on any level. Joining the European Union, again, is something that we have to have a referendum on after we become independent. That's really what we have to do. And then joining the Eurozone, I guess, would be another referendum after that if we decided to join the European Union.
Okay, thank you. So,
just jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, Derk.
Because I think it's a good lesson. I mean, when Scotland lost its independence, I think it was in 1707. It was after the financial crisis. Okay, so the Scottish upper class was speculating on some kind of success of some venture in today's
the Darien scheme. The Darien scheme.
Exactly that one. And the people who went to today, what is Panama, they were killed by the sicknesses and the problems that they had there in the tropics, and almost none of them returned, and no profits were made, and apparently the Scottish upper class invested most of their gold in this, and they kind of ran out of gold when that happened, and then they had to ask the British to help them out, and that was the condition of help. So that is a lesson in itself, that if you have a financial crisis and then you pack your currency to something like gold or foreign currency, then you're lost. I mean, Iceland shows us what is the modern idea of this, that you just have your own currency. It's not packed, and if you're a big banking crisis in your country, you just write off the debts and then you just continue. And so that holds a lesson in itself.
I should point out to our audience, they need to be aware that in 1707, there wasn't universal suffrage in Scotland.
Derk, we have a follow-up question from Sam Hubble, and he writes, MMT promotes the idea that spending precedes taxes and borrowing. On an accounting basis, has any national treasury or its central bank officially confirmed that this is true? And let me ask you another question because we're running out of time. So this is another question for you, Derk, if you can remember the first one. And this is from Natalie Shamat, and she says, maybe qualification and training structures need to produce even more people claiming the Eurozone as a common employment space, as long as the United States remains a fairy tale. So if you could just answer both of those questions in the last, let's say, 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think I'll start with the second one, because that's a very good question. I mean, of course, you have to build up skills and knowledge. And also with the job guarantee, the idea is not just to employ people in a way that they are somehow stabilized or that they find something that they like to do, but the idea is also to build up more skills, to upgrade skills, to have people understand things that they didn't before, so that it leads to better employment maybe. So the idea is always to get these people out of the job guarantee because they want like to earn more money. So I mean, that's the kind of incentive for people to use the job guarantee as some kind of stepping stone and then jump into a public sector job or a private sector job like a proper one. And the other question, well, my own research was focusing on Germany, and it is, I think, clear that nobody said that I'm wrong. Okay, so in the German Parliament, we asked some questions. So a co-host of mine, Maurice Höfgen, who works for a member of Parliament, they had some of these, we call them little questions in Parliament. They have to be answered by the government, and we were asking about some of the details. And it's really like this. So if the German government spends, so the federal government, then it has an account with Deutsche Bundesbank. And it is 0 in the morning, and then they just run it something like an overdraft. Okay, so the Bundesbank is just crediting bank accounts, and then it's writing up a negative number in the government's account of the same size, and then that accumulates over the day. And at night, or after the day is done, the government has to either it's going to be a positive number because tax revenue is also put into this kind of account. But the Bundesbank is very clear. They say that government money in the government account, they say, is not money. Okay, they're very specific about it. And why not? Well, because money is nothing else but a tax credit, but the government doesn't make payments to the government. Okay, so that means that it cannot be money. It's a statistic. It's a sum of numbers, and it's a political game. So you can imagine like this, that there's a green traffic light for the German Bundesbank to make payments for the federal government if the account is 0 or positive, and it's red when it's negative. And tax revenues and bond revenues are used to manipulate that traffic light, but it has nothing to do with money technically. So if you try to add a number to an Excel sheet, which is what the Bundesbank is doing when it spends, that number doesn't come from anywhere. It's ridiculous to ask that question even, okay? It's like the score of a computer game. Where's that number coming from? Well, it's just a computer score. And it's the same with the German government. There's political rules, again, which force it to have this kind of 0 there. But that has nothing to do with the spending itself, which is just crediting a bank account. I hope that's clear enough. Thanks for the question.
Unfortunately, we've come to the end, though I would happily listen to Karen and Derk for some time more. So just let me say, I want to first thank the speakers, Karen, Derk, and Patricia, who's had to go, for really excellent presentations. I want to thank the audience, especially those who submitted Q&As. And I want to thank Samuel Desquen, who's been our technical moderator. And of course, I want to thank ultimately the Global Forum for Democratizing Work, who's given us this opportunity to talk about the job guarantee, which is such an important program. And I hope we can do other things like this other times. So again, thank you very much, and all the best, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Well, thank you, David. Thanks for doing it.
Yep. All the best now. Thank you, Derk.
Yeah. Should we just continue to talk, or I mean, they will probably cut the transmission anyway, or they will cut it out when they
I'd happily talk to you. And going back to our discussion that we had before we started, for example, I follow, I read Mitchell on the Brexit and post-Brexit, but I find that he has this sort of 1,000-mile view on what's going on, and whereas I read people on Twitter who are much more much more granular about all this, and I find it I feel that in any particular topic I can eventually find someone who makes sense to me, but I've never been able to find anyone who can explain. I mean, you have to give up something in trade negotiations, and I just don't know how one. If you want something back, and I know if you're part of the EU, you can get a better deal than if you're on your own. I just don't know whether. I mean, if the EU was more a gathering of properly sovereign states who negotiated a position beforehand and then entered into discussions, would we be happier, or is it just because the EU is so undemocratic that we don't like the arrangement, or is it because the EU is so neoliberal that its trade deals will always, align themselves with neoliberal projects, and so end up undermining the place of labor and enhancing the place of finance? There's so many variables, Derk, in this.
Oh, I agree, and I mean, I read Thomas Fazio also sometimes, the co-author of Bill.
That's right.
And the problem is that I think politics is much more complicated than they make it out to be. So, I mean, for example, my Spanish MMT colleagues and the Italian ones as well, they said when the pandemic happened, they will impose austerity again. And I said, from the Berlin perspective, I mean, I heard the political parties, and the one thing that I did not hear was austerity. And it's kind of interesting that you have to understand also the countries. I mean, for example, the German policy makers they're not neoliberal in the sense that they will only do neoliberal policies. Most of them are bureaucrats, so they just do what they are told to do. And then the politicians who have the responsibility, they just also do what they have decided to do. But I mean, that's the nice part about the democratic process. We probably get a new government now, which is the Red, Green plus Liberal Party government. And I think it will be much better than the Grand Coalition, which we had, because that really was horrible. So these things do change. And I mean, I'm not saying that the new administration will somehow fix Europe or the Eurozone, but I think it's likely that there will be a different kind of spirit now. I mean, it was the Grand Coalition kind of ignored everybody else. So they said, okay, for us, European politics is always German politics. So if something is not popular with German voters, we won't do it. And I have the feeling that it's different now, that also the other countries are now making clear that if they are not being listened to, then the Eurozone is done for. So I think it's a new situation. There's new politicians, and there's new ideas. So I think that if you look at Bill Mitchell, for example, he's very far away, and he doesn't know these kind of differences. For him, it's all the neoliberal EU. Yeah, it's neoliberal, and I know that also the institutional setup is deeply neoliberal. But as I said, so the one way out of this would be to have the United States of Europe, which then it means that we don't use these superstructures anymore. So we just have maybe we have a proper European regional parliament and one which is a European parliament. So to make sure that just like on a national level, that all the regions are represented and all the people are represented. And if we would get there, then of course we could say, well, all of this kind of superstructure from the EU, which was neoliberal, it was just a building block, but we have destroyed it now, and now we are a proper United States of Europe, and then all of this doesn't matter anymore. So that's the solution out of this kind of problem. And only with this kind of idea you can kind of say, well, it's acceptable to have this neoliberal superstructure right now. But of course, I agree with Bill and Thomas when they say that the superstructure is neoliberal. And I mean, if I could change it like this, I would. I mean, but the problem is that right now you have to have some kind of political idea and the political majority as well. And I don't see it coming right now. So now we are in the standstill moment. I mean, as you have seen, we have just given all these national governments the possibility to spend whatever they spend. How about that?
Was there any formula as to how much any one country could spend, or how much the ECB would bail them out, buy their bonds?
No. So the deficit limits are off also next year. So Stability and Growth Pact is neutralized. So deficit size doesn't matter. And the ECB just said with this pandemic emergency purchase program, well, we just buy up hundreds of billions of bonds, and we make sure that the spreads won't rise. And there was no limit given. So
are the Greeks like trying to make up for lost time and spending like crazy to catch up, or are they? They have a conservative government, so they apparently don't do it as much as they should probably. But I heard that Draghi is doing that. Okay, so Draghi in Italy, he's ramping up government spending, and I think they're growing at 5 or 6% this year. Of course, once you start to grow, you will have public surplus because you're growing so quickly. Okay, because private investment crowds in, and then you have a private deficit and a public surplus, which is caused by private lending, private borrowing. So that's where he wants to go with Italy, I guess, and it's the correct strategy. I mean, that's what you have to do. I mean, Moser once talked about, the way you deal with the Maastricht issue is you just hand out money on a per capita basis, and Germany would end up getting more and Portugal would end up getting less, but each person would get the same amount. But we're entering an area where the extent to which the ECB benefits different countries is going to vary greatly. I mean, do you think people are going to get upset about, retrospectively saying, well, Italy did so much better out of this than Brussels, or Belgium or something like that? Do you think that's a problem?
Well, I mean, in terms of private credit, I mean, for every loan that you take out, you have to repay that loan. So, I mean, the Chinese can create their own currency, and German exporters are happy to sell to the Chinese. So why they have no say in how much money the Chinese are creating. Okay, so why should they be having a say about the kind of money that Italy creates? So I was just thinking about this kind of issue yesterday in the context of another paper. So one idea would be to say, look, we put in full employment targets, and all the national governments, they will have to. Oh, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, the kindergarten called. I think I have to call them back in a minute. But let me just finish.
We don't have to go on much longer.
No, just this thought. So I mean, in terms of resources, I mean, if a country has a current account surplus, for example, why would you not want to allow that government to spend more money? Okay, so in net they still export more stuff than they import. Okay, so if you are worried about the amount of resources that a government uses, well, then you can tie these two things together, and that would be a better solution than we have today. So there's compromises, political compromises possible, I think, where we can help to highlight those things and say, look, if you are afraid that the Italians spend a lot of money and then they buy stuff from Germany and then we cannot consume that, well, of course, the correct answer to that would be, well, then pay higher wages in Germany and then we have no problem with that. But there might be some kind of possibility for political compromise that we can kind of soften the rules that we have now and make them more or less irrelevant. Okay, so that they are maybe still there on paper, but they don't bite in reality. Okay, I have to call back the kindergarten. I'm sorry.
Anyway, lovely talking to you, Derk.
Yeah.
And I don't know how, but I would love to take up your offer for talking about trade, but
yeah,
just keep that in the back of your mind. But thank you so much for participating today.
Yeah, thanks for organizing this, David, and good luck with your health.
Thank you so much, Derk. Take care now.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.